it for so many years. And a thank you to JP Morgan Chase and Company, who are also longtime supporters of the college. I wanted to go ahead and introduce our friend Brian Huff from JP Morgan Chase to say a few words. Brian?
Hi, can you hear me okay, Ruth?
Yes.
Great. My name is Brian Huff with JP Morgan Chase's Commercial Bank. I run the Middle Market Group, and we are honored to be a sponsor of this exciting event. At JP Morgan, we help clients bank, borrow, invest, and make financial decisions that align with their personal and professional goals and priorities. In partnership with our commercial bank and business banking teams in the region, we have helped so many business owners grow and scale their companies. And throughout this pandemic, it's been all hands on deck for us. Westchester Community College is an important fabric of our community and exactly why we are all here tonight. It is also an important institution for the firm. One of my colleagues is a board member, and last year, JP Morgan Chase invested $500,000 to WCCC to help the college to develop high-quality job training programs in growing local industries, such as an 11-week boot camp for healthcare occupations and classes at the White Plains Educational and Training Center. These funds were also provided for financial coaching and to help set students on the right path forward after graduation. But our support shouldn't be overshadowed by your support. Thanks for coming out tonight as well. I hope everyone enjoys the wine and cheese, as this is going to be a great event. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brian. And thank you especially at JP Morgan Chase. You all have been such generous partners to us in a lot of our workforce development work. I want to pivot now and tell you a little something about WCC itself. There are over 35,000 people taking classes at WCC each year, making it Westchester's largest educational institution. Some of our students are part of the workforce development programs, heading toward careers in sectors like the health sciences, culinary arts, and cybersecurity, and some are on track for an associate's degree with aspirations to transfer to a four-year college. The tuition for our full-time students is a little under $5,000, and while that might seem like a bargain relative to other institutions, we understand that the true cost of attending WCC with things like books, transportation, food, the opportunity cost of being in a classroom instead of at a job, that makes the cost really closer to about $16,000 a year. And this feels very out of reach for many of our students. And we at the foundation are really proud to be able to support our students and help them close the gap. I'm proud to say that during the just completed 2019-2020 academic year, our WCC Foundation awarded over $2 million to our awesome students in direct scholarships. This is the point at which, if we were meeting in person, that would be an applause line. So you can all applaud at home. Anyway, enough from me about the college. I think it's better to hear about the WCC experience directly from one of our students. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our 2020 WCC valedictorian, Brandon Fernandez, whose story I'm sure will inspire you. Brandon?
Hello, everybody. My name is Brandon Fernandez. Just a little bit about myself. I have two very hardworking immigrant parents, and right after graduating from high school, I decided to take 2 years off to work with a nonprofit, and so wasn't the traditional student. And when I was researching about the different opportunities I could have, WCC popped up, and I decided to give it a shot, and it ended up being truly one of the best experiences of my life for the past 2 years. While I was at WCC, I had a lot of opportunities to become involved and really to serve my community. And I found how great it was to just give back. I was able to receive a lot while I was at WCC. For example, through the WCC Foundation, I was able to receive 2 scholarships while I was a student that really helped me out. And that really just gave me the opportunity to not so much to focus on the financials and the stress and the worries, but just to give more of my time and dedication to my studies, and also just serving my community. And while I was at WCC, I was able to also be the president of the Honor Society, which was a great thing. We worked with a lot of different students who really wanted to achieve a lot of different goals and move very forward. So as my time in WCC, I definitely had a lot of leadership experience, which was great. And even now, just as previously mentioned, I graduated as valedictorian, and because of that, through the WCC Foundation, I was also able to receive a graduating scholarship, which will help me when I transfer in the fall to Hunter College. My goal is to be a clinical psychologist, and the end goal is, to eventually get a doctorate. So it's going to be a lengthy journey, but one that would definitely be worth it. So thank you all for being here. So.
Thank you so much, Brandon, for making time to come and share your experiences and your perspective with us. That was so terrific. Congratulations on your graduation and all that you've accomplished. Wishing you all the best in these future endeavors. Now, if you haven't already sneaked a taste or two, it's almost time to sample the incredible cheeses from Second Mass in Pleasantville. If you're out and about, the store is really worth a visit as it has a really special flavor of its own. Thank you again to Ivy Ronquillo, the proprietor, who curated the cheese portion of our tasting. I'm thrilled to introduce Tim Kopek, who has opened his private collection to us and provided us with very special wine and his considerable expertise this evening. Tim was the wine director of and a partner in Manhattan's much-missed 3-star restaurant Veritas, where he received the James Beard Foundation Award for Outstanding Wine Service. Now he is a founding partner of Private Cellar Selections, which sources wine for restaurants, corporations, and individual collections. I give you, Tim, cheers. Enjoy. Tim? Oh, you're muted.
Oh, okay, there we go. Hear me good?
Hello.
Okay, wonderful, great. Welcome everybody. Thank you all very much for participating in this very worthy event that you are all willing to sponsor. The Scholarship Fund for Westchester is very admirable, and I appreciate it. It's a very great thing to do, especially during these very difficult times. As was just stated, my background is that I worked for 20 years in New York City as a sommelier. First was down in Montrachet in Tribeca in the 90s, and afterwards was at Veritas on 20th Street. I got interested in wine from my household with my family. Both my parents loved cooking. They actually both took cooking classes with James Beard himself. And I became interested in wine at around 18 or 19 years old, and I decided I wanted to take a wine class in New York City with Harriet Lembeck at the Waldorf Astoria. And it was a really eye-opening experience because I thought I knew something about wine, but she kind of opened my eyes to so many different wines. As I was going through school, I arrived upon the Culinary Institute up in Hyde Park, which I graduated in very early 1991. And immediately got my first job down at Montrachet, which was really spectacular. The learning curve was absolutely tremendous at the restaurant. I would say that although we're tasting 3 wines today, when you're working as a sommelier, you need to work in the day prior to customers coming in for dinner. And that's really when you're doing all of the mise en place, or putting the wine cellar together, or printing the wine list. And when there are holes in the wine list, you are tasting with distributors throughout the day to try to fill those holes. So for example, if you needed a Chablis, like our first wine, you would contact maybe half a dozen distributors, and you would say, okay, this is what I'm kind of looking for, this is the price point that I'm looking for, and you would arrange for the following day to taste many different examples. So I will say over my 20-year career, I would say approximately, I would be tasting about 150 wines a day. That sounds like an enormous amount of wine. It is a lot to taste, but you're not drinking 150 glasses of wine. During the day, you're tasting, you're spitting into a spittoon, and then when the evening comes, when customers are ordering wine, we're opening up the wine, pouring a small taste at the Gueridon, with a little side cart off on the side, and confirming that the wine is as it should be, and then going to the table with it. And then, of course, at the end of the night, you are outright drinking glasses of wine because you've just worked all day, which was quite fun. So I feel like I have quite a bit of experience in tasting the wines, in knowing the wine regions, and visiting the winemakers. That's really one of the perks of the job, besides having interaction with regular customers on an evening basis. being able to travel and see the vineyards and step in the vineyards and go into the cellars and meet the winemakers is very rewarding for me. I'm going to suggest that everyone at least begin tasting the white wine, and I'll go into details of that wine shortly. The reason I chose these three wines today, the reason I chose French wines, is that I will say, for the most part, French wines are my favorite wines. Yes, there's very good wine made in California. Yes, there's very good wine made in Italy and in Spain and Austria and Germany. But what appeals most to me regularly are French wines. And it was pretty much the basis of what was the first restaurant. I worked in a French restaurant. And the reason I chose these three specific wines is that they are all from classic regions. So they're not super obscure. They are wines that you could find if you went to a good restaurant or if you went to a reputable wine shop. But these selections, I think, outperform their kind of price point. They're either small producers, they're not well-known producers, but they're producers who have very high integrity in the way they make their wines. And to me, that is ultimately what a sommelier should be looking for. It's very easy to choose the greatest wine, the most expensive wine, and then tell the customer why it's good or why they should want it. The problem is they might not be comfortable with a $2,000 price tag on that bottle when they go to drink it. So although there are some people that will drink wines at that level, more often than not, people are interested in more modestly priced wines. So you want wines that over-deliver at their price point, no matter what the price point is. So let's see. We'll start with number one, with the Chablis. Because we had such wonderful turnout for this event, we had to use four different versions of this very same wine. It's a Chablis Premier Cru. Some of you have the Premier Cru Beauvoir. Some of you have the Premier Cru Montman. And as you can see on the back of my screen, I have the Côte de Léché. Some of you have 2015, some of you have 2014. But the producer, Laurent Tribou, is a fantastic producer who makes very high quality Chablis. He's not super famous the way some other producers like Raveneau or Dauvissat are, partially because he doesn't own the most famous vineyards in Chablis, those being the Grand Cru vineyards. Vineyards like Clos and Cruz would be two examples of them. He owns smaller Premier Crus like the ones that we have in front of us. However, he puts all of his attention into these wines to get the most concentration, but with the greatest balance to the wine. When you make wine, you don't want to make big, heavy, alcoholic, top-heavy wines. What you want is you want wines of balance, because balance is what works so well with food. So we're going to taste number one. I'm sure many of you have done it already, but I'll give it a taste now. Chablis is a sub-area within the region of Burgundy. Burgundy is approximately 2.5 hours southeast of Paris by car. In the northern section of Burgundy, you have the appellation of Chablis. It's a little bit confusing because when I was growing up, you used to be able to buy jug wine from California. It would be either Carlo Rossi or Almaden, and they would say they're mountain Chablis. And that always kind of like confused me. I was like, okay, is Chablis the grape varietal that makes the wine? Or can it be grown in California and grown in France? But the truth is, Chablis is a geographic region, and they're only allowed to grow the grape varietal Chardonnay to make the wine. So if you're with your friends and you're at a restaurant and it's your turn to choose the wine, and someone says, choose a Chardonnay, you could feel comfortable choosing a Chablis, and it would in fact be Chardonnay. They may be put off and said, oh, no, I wanted to have Chardonnay, and then you can kind of trump them and say, of course, everybody knows that Chablis is made with Chardonnay. So What is unique about Chardonnay grown in Chablis, which differs then, say, from the Napa Valley or from the more southern section in Burgundy called the Côte de Beaune. Côte de Beaune are the famous appellations like Montrachet, Corton Charlemagne, Meursault, Chassagne-Montrachet. Those are just some examples of villages in Burgundy. Chablis is grown mostly on chalk or limestone, just like the nearby neighbor of Champagne. And why that's interesting is that the vine is like a weed, and it digs down for sustenance and for nutrition and for water. As it sets itself into rock, or in this particular case, limestone, or chalk, that's not very nutritious. So it makes the vine root system work much deeper into the soil to try to find the sustenance that it needs for life. In that pursuit, as the vines go down into the chalk, it brings up more mineral and characteristic of that soil into the wine. So when you taste this wine, it tastes very mineral, very high energy on the wine, kind of like a nervous energy to the wine. Some of the aromas that I smell when I smell this are almost like, say, like a candied lemon rind, or sometimes they say you can smell like the sea or like an oyster shell. Or also when I smell this one, I smell like dry flower petal. And I don't mean like a rhododendron or a rose, you know, something like a delicate flower that's dry, something maybe that you'd find in a potpourri. Notice that what it does not have is it doesn't have the big, buttery, buttered popcorn, vanilla character that you would more likely find in a Napa Valley Chardonnay, or even in, say, a Corton Charlemagne. The reason is because, again, we're a little bit north of the rest of Burgundy, and because the wine is, in essence, kind of stripped down of all the richness that it could pull from a warmer region or from more rich soil, they choose not to age the wine in new oak barrels. It's very common that red wines and white wines are aged in new oak barrel, and very often when we smell a wine that's aged in the oak barrel, we can smell that oak. Now, that doesn't sound very romantic, but it's a background, or it's a foundational part of many wines. And the reason that is that after they vinify the wine, they put it into the oak barrel, and then they slowly let the wine age in the cellars for, say, usually 14 months, could be 12, could be 18. And the reason they're doing that is because the wood staves that make the barrel are porous. Not so porous that the liquid could come out of the pores, but it allows oxygen to go in and out of the barrel and touches the wine. The oxygen going in and out and touching the wine slowly mellows the wine. If it's in a new oak barrel, they'll always toast the inside of the barrel before they fully close it. And sometimes when you have a very oaky wine, you might be able to smell something like a marshmallow that might go over a campfire, or fluffernutter is another common smell that you would find from a very oaked wine. But in Chablis, they're not going to do that because it's a leaner wine. It's a more mineral-driven wine. So this particular producer, Tribou, will put the wine into oak barrels, but they're very old oak barrels. So they seep no flavor out of the wood itself. It just slowly oxidizes in the cellar, which basically mellows the wine. It would be the equivalent of putting a wine in a barrel, in a bottle, and then aging it for 5 or 10 years, and then opening it. But instead, they put it into the barrel, and that slowly allows it to mellow and make it approachable and pleasurable for you when you drink it. To me, this wine is extraordinary. This is exactly what I want from Chablis. I love that racy mineral character. Makes my mouth salivate, makes me be drawn back to the glass. Classic pairings. We have a cheese with each of the wines today, but if we were in, say, a bistro in Paris, we would be having raw oysters, we would be having braised mussels. We would be having langoustine, things like this. So shellfish would go very well with this type of wine. For the cheese that we're pairing with it, we're doing the Tome de Chèvre de Grand Mère, which is goat cheese. And when you taste the goat cheese, the reason it works so well with this wine is that there's a chalky character to the goat cheese. And the chalk and the kind of mineral and that slight kind of lemon rind character that I described in glass marries very well. In other words, cheese doesn't dominate the wine and the wine doesn't dominate the cheese. So I think that it's a nice pairing. I tasted them before I came on to talk with you. The next wine that we're going to taste is going to be the Bordeaux, the Domaine de Goulouchet. On your printed paper, it tells you that we're going to do the Crozes Hermitage, but I changed the order. And the reason I'm changing the order is because this Bordeaux is going to be lighter bodied than what the Crozes Hermitage is. So maybe I'll just mention right now, very often if you see professionals, whether they be sommeliers or wine buyers, when they're tasting wine, they often do kind of a lot of odd things. Like they'll put the wine in their mouth and they'll do slurping noises, and it's rather rude to do when you're at the dinner table, but professionally, it's a very good thing to do because you're trying to accentuate the character of the wine on your palate, so you can really kind of see deeper into the wine exactly what you're having. So one of the things another thing that you'll often see, and I'll try to back up so on my screen you can see. If we take the glass and we pick it up off of the table and we put our nose in the glass, the wine is what it is. We can smell the wine as it is. However, if you swirl the glass the way I'm doing right now, be careful. Any of you are wearing, white or a light color, you could accidentally spill it over. If you're nervous about doing that, you can simply put the glass on the table. You make one circle and then you push back and forth. And when you do that, that will do the same thing as what I'm doing right here. In other words, you're creating a vortex within the glass. And the vortex is actually raising the level of the wine up the walls of the glass, thereby increasing the surface area of oxygen to the wine. So when you do that, and then you stop, and then you stick your nose in the glass, you're getting a highly concentrated version, aromatically, of the wine. And you'll never see a professional simply pick up the glass and begin to taste. They're always going to swirl, they're going to aerate, and then they're going to smell. They'll smell, it smells good, it's inviting. That will draw them in to want to take a taste. We then take a taste. And that little slurp noise that I do is you're just dragging oxygen over your palate. In other words, doing a bit more of what the swirling does in the glass. And it gives you a concentrated flavor of that particular wine. One other thing I would say, when you're holding the glass, you always want to hold the glass by the stem. I often see, even in movies, you see people holding the glass by the bowl. That's incorrect, and you should not do that. It puts fingerprints on the glass, it makes it unsightly, and it also changes the temperature of the wine. So you always want to hold by the stem. If any of you read the brochure, I went to pretty great length to explain to you that you should have opened your wines in advance, you should have kept them cool, and you should have served the wine in clean glassware. So for all of you that read it, thank you, and have followed. And for those of you that did not, I want to let you know how important that is to do. If you go to a very good restaurant, they're always going to serve the wine at the proper serving temperature. That means the white wine's relatively cold. I said refrigerator cold, which works well. And red wines are always served at cellar temperature. Maybe some of you have traveled in Europe and you had a wonderful wine, you had a wonderful wine experience, it was very romantic. You bought wine when you were in Europe, or you bought wine when you were in Sonoma or Napa, You came home a month later, you open the wine, and it's not quite as a romantic experience as you had when you were traveling. And you say to yourself, oh, maybe it was just that time, or it was that special moment, or whatever. But I think a lot has to do with how you prepare your wine. Serving red wine cool to the touch is essential. It allows the wine to show its fruit more often, as opposed to its alcohol or its structure or its framework. So we want the wine cool because that's where we're going to find the pretty components within the wine. So getting to the Domaine de Goulouchy. This one is from Bordeaux. Bordeaux, let me back up one second. Wines that are made in the New World or labeled in the New World would be Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, California, Washington, Oregon. They're always going to label their wines by the grape varietal that makes them. So for example, in Napa Valley, you might have Dun Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa. It's very easy for the consumer. I can pronounce the name Dun. I know he's the winemaker. Cabernet Sauvignon is the grape. Okay, that makes it very easy. And we're in the region of Napa, which is north of San Francisco. In the old world, in Italy and in Spain and in France, they label the wines by the geographic region that they come from. So they don't tell you what the grape varietal is. Of course, there are some exceptions to almost everything I'll say tonight, but you need to basically memorize, when it says Bordeaux, what are the grapes that can be used to make that wine. Now, many of us on this call maybe don't care. We just simply know we like the wine or we don't like a particular type of wine. But as a professional, you quickly memorize what grapes are they allowed to grow in the area in the geographic region. We know in Chablis, you have to grow Chardonnay, but in Bordeaux, you can grow 5 different grape varietals. Usually, the wines are dominated by the grape varietal Cabernet Sauvignon, and then the grape varietal Merlot. And then there's 3 smaller grape varietals that get blended in to make what they call the Bordeaux blend. Sometimes in California, you see a label that says Meritage or Meritage. That basically is the Bordeaux blend. Primarily Cabernet Sauvignon, then Merlot, then small amounts of Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. Here, from the Domaine de Goulouchy, we're on what is called the right bank in Bordeaux. You'll often hear the term left bank and right bank. Left bank is the famous part of Bordeaux where the Medoc is. That's where the famous chateaux like Latour and Margaux and Lynch-Bages and Villard-de-Rose are. They have very gravelly soil, and Cabernet Sauvignon grows very well in that area. Problem with only making a wine with Cabernet Sauvignon is that it's a very small berry, and that berry tends to be very tannic. The skin contains a lot of tannin, and the stem that the grape is grown on also contains tannin. That all gets thrown into the fermenting vat, and you end up with a tannic wine. Tannin can be experienced if you've ever taken the last sip of a cup of tea and you run your tongue against the roof of your mouth, you get that slightly gritty character. That's tannin. That's the same thing that you'll find in wine. So in turn, what they'll do is they'll blend Merlot, which is a much more supple or softer yielding grape varietal for making wine, and it basically mellows out that wine. On the right bank in Bordeaux, which is where we are with this Domaine de Goulouchy, it's flipped. They switch the predominant grape varietal is Merlot, and then they blend in some Cabernet Sauvignon for structure. So Merlot basically ripens earlier, and it's considered that the right bank wines are earlier consuming, and the left bank wines are more age-worthy. Again, of course, there are exceptions to both of those statements. But what I like about this particular wine is that there is an elegance or purity to this wine. If you taste it and say, oh, it's not very tannic, it's not very full-bodied, it's not very intense, you're correct. But that's what the winemaker wanted to do. He wanted to make a pure and elegant example of a wine that would serve well on the dining room table. So interestingly, one of the winemakers for this is a friend of mine. He's a Canadian. His name is Marco Pelletier, and he used to be the sommelier at the Bristol in Paris. Previously, he worked at Taillevent, also in Paris, and he's a wonderfully charismatic guy. And he made this wine, in my opinion, more in the style of a Burgundy. Very silky, very pure, relatively low alcohol. We're only at 12.5% here. And it's a food-friendly wine. So if you like your wine more rich and more full-bodied, I understand, but try to enjoy this wine for its finesse, is what I would say. And I think it's hugely successful. This one is, we're serving with the Comté, the cheese. And Comté, for me, is one of my favorite cheeses. And it's also one of the most wine-friendly cheeses that I know. You can serve it with champagne and it's good. You can serve it with white wine and it's good. You can serve it with a light red or a full-bodied red, and it's very complementary. Traditional food pairings for Bordeaux would be something like a spring lamb or a red meat, usually. But because the way this Domaine de Goulichy is made, I think it's more versatile. I could even argue that it would go well with a fish, but when I say a fish, something like salmon, something full of flavor. Not a light, delicate sole, but something more flavorful, or maybe even better yet, something like chicken or bird or something like that. But one of my favorites, and just a tremendous value wine, I think, also. Going on to our final wine, we have from the Northern Rhone, 2017, Crozes Hermitage, Vieilles Vignes de Gervanne from Georges Lalaxoglu. Crozes Hermitage, we're located in the Northern Rhone, so geographically we are south of the city of Lyon, Lyon being the culinary capital of France. We're maybe 30 minutes south of Lyon, going all along the Rhone River. The first appellations that you hit when you head south of Lyon are Condrieu, which is famous for making a very unctuous white wine. Then you hit the terraced hills of Côte-Rôtie, and then as you go down further, you arrive at the very famous vineyard Hermitage. But surrounding the famous vineyard Hermitage is the appellation of Crozes Hermitage. And Crozes Hermitage, they make the wines with the grape varietal Syrah, the red grape varietal Syrah, and they're allowed to blend some white grape varietals into the wine, that being Marsanne and Roussanne. And they do that in very small percentages because they're looking to bring kind of more perfume or elegance to a very full-bodied wine. This particular example is 100% Syrah, and it's from a very special vineyard in Crozes Hermitage. As you can see on the label, it's a real mouthful, the producer, Lalaxoglu. It's a Greek merchant that moved to France in the 70s to attend school. He fell in love, married a woman, and settled in the Northern Rhone. And he is affectionately called Le Grec, or the Greek, amongst all the winemakers. And he's one of the most knowledgeable persons that I know having to do with wines in both the North and Southern Rhone. And this is a bottling that he makes himself. He's identified some great producers, and usually from that producer, he'll identify specific vineyards that he thinks make exceptional wine, and he'll attempt to buy barrels from that winemaker and bottle it under his own name, which is exactly what he did here. This particular one comes from a vineyard called Picot d'Aire, and it's a small vineyard basically in the middle of a forest. So it's quite unusual, quite difficult to get access to. Speaking historically, in the mid to late 1800s, there was a blight that attacked all of the vines in Europe called phylloxera. Phylloxera is basically a louse that lives in the soil that eats the root system of the vine and kills the vine. The way that they were able to, say, heal the vineyards is they discovered that if they grafted their French grape vine onto American rootstock, you simply just cut a notch in the stem, you put them together and tie it together. The American root system is protected from the phylloxera, from this louse. So very often you'll hear that all European wines are really made off of American rootstock, and for the most part it's true. But what they also don't tell you is that it was from America that the louse was introduced that devastated all of these European vines. And it happened in all of the major wine producing regions in Europe. And it also happened in the Northern Rhone, in Crozes-Hermitage. And what they did in order to kind of revive the grape varietal that makes this one, the Syrah, they went to this vineyard, Picot d'Hyères, and they identified the Syrah that was made there to be like the most healthy, the most interesting, most in-depth yielding fruit for making red wines. And they began to recultivate that vine. And that was basically, say, the mother vine for planting in all the other famous Northern Rhone appellations like Côte-Rôtie and Hermitage and Saint-Joseph. So historically, it's a very famous vineyard. And we'll give this one a swirl. Like I said before, we'll create our vortex. We stick our nose in the glass, and immediately you can see this is a dramatically different smelling wine than what the Bordeaux was. When I smell this wine, I smell almost like glove leather or saddle leather or blackberry jam or maybe black currant. It's a much more substantial wine. It's a much darker wine. You don't need to be an expert to look at these two wines and see this wine is much darker, more blue, more purple in color. That would be indicative that it would be more full bodied. And when I taste the wine, I basically get a confirmation of all of the flavors and aromas that I just described. 3 wines is a fair amount of wine for maybe some of you are by yourself or you're just a couple. It would be difficult to power through all 3 bottles tonight. And I'm not suggesting that you do, although some of you may. You can put the cork back in whatever you don't drink, and these wines will drink well the next day also. The one that will last the longest in the refrigerator will be the Crozes-Hermitage. It's the one that's built for many years of aging. And I would suggest that you drink the Bordeaux and the Chablis prior, and then eventually get around to the Crozes-Hermitage. If we were to serve food with this, I think you would want to do something very gamey, something like braised lamb shanks, or anything venison, or wild boar, or something really full flavored. That is what's going to stand up to the intense kind of leather character that you find in this wine. For the cheese, we're serving a Spanish cheese, which is a sheep cheese, and it's the Torta de Casal, which is kind of more on the funky aroma, more gamey, more wild. And I think it supports and complements well. I think maybe that cheese would be a little much for the Chablis, but for the Crozes, I think it marries very well. So I wish I had some more time to go into more depth on all of these wines and all the producers, but I recognize that there's a time constraint to this. We appreciate all of your time for participating, and I'm going to stay on for a bit longer, and I think we're going to go into more of a social setting after closing comments, and I'm just going to hang around, and perhaps we can get some questions, which I will be happy to answer, whether they have to do with these wines or whether they have to do with anything else regarding wine. If I know the answer, I'll tell you. If I don't know the answer, of course, I'll also tell you I don't know. So thank you. And Ruth, perhaps if you're there, you can forward me any comments. Oh, Ruth, I think you're on.
Thank you so much, Tim. I needed permission from the host to unmute and start my video and all of that. And with all the wine that we're drinking, it took a little coordination. we still have a few minutes on the program as we planned it. And Tim, I wanted to share some questions that have come through in the chat function.
Great.
And remind everybody that we're going to stay on for the program until about 7:15. And then Tim has agreed to hang around with us sort of Brady Bunch style in the gallery view from 7:15 to about 7:45, just for a bit of an after party. But for the Q&A, Tim, here's one of the first questions that came in. You mentioned that you chose these wines because French wines are your favorite, but why these specific wines tonight?
Well, again, what I like about French wines is I tend to find that they are less flamboyant, or they are less alcoholic, or they are less rich and intense than some of the New World alternatives. So for that reason, I appreciate the subtlety. I believe that when people first start learning about wine, the thing they gravitate to most are big and obvious characteristics and flavors. And that's understandable because we're learning about the wine. The more you taste, however, the less you need to be hit over the head with a sledgehammer to get the character of say, the grape or the region. You want some subtlety. So I think French wines, when they're made well, and again, when they're made well, have that subtlety and that complexity that I like. In this particular case, these are three not very well-known producers that are, I would describe as insider wines. If you were to bring these three wines to a table of sommeliers who on Sunday afternoon are celebrating on their own dime at, say, a local restaurant or inexpensive restaurant, these are the wines that they would be bringing. They deliver and they perform like more expensive wines, and yet they are more moderately priced wines.
And are these wines that we would be able to purchase somewhere locally? I know that these came from your private collection.
Yeah, I think almost in every case I bought these wines in Europe, but I know they are also imported into the States. I think you can find them, but I wouldn't say, this Chablis is a great producer, and if you can find him, great, but don't turn your back on trying other Chablis producers. They should all have a similar character. I just happen to think that Trabue really delivers, at say a higher price character. So to answer your question, yes, sometimes you can find them, and many times you would not be able to.
Thank you. And we love your background. We're getting a lot of comments on your background, so thank you for that.
Wonderful.
Can you say a little something to us about the labels, about the artwork and things like that? The Hermitage label especially is intricate, very beautiful.
Yeah, so again, with all of these wines, remember, we're always going to be talking about the geographic region that the wines come from. So, that's the important thing. The truth is that in Crozes Hermitage, in this geographic region, same thing with the Chablis, you can grow different grape varietals, but you lose the ability to use the name Crozes Hermitage, or you lose what they call the AOC, or the Appellation Origine Contrôlée. In France, this Appellation Origine Contrôlée is not a guarantee of quality, but it's a guarantee that the product is specific to that area. And all of the cheeses that we have, well, except for the Spanish cheese, they will also have AOC status. And fantastic butter, like Escheray butter from France, will also have its own AOC, its own Appellation Origine Contrôlée. So you wouldn't want to plant different grapes in Crozes Hermitage, even though you might think it make better wine, but you could only then sell your wine as vin de table, and you would get a much lower price point. So in regards to the artwork on the labels, that's strictly, what the winemaker or the domaine thinks is interesting, or more often than not, it's what their father or their grandfather did, and they're just trying to keep consistency for the future generations, so that the market is not confused. They want it to be relatively recognizable. So when I see when I see this type of artwork, I may say, okay, it's not Crozes Hermitage, but it is Georges Laxiglu, and I know he's a really highly reputable merchant, and most likely his wine's going to be fantastic.
Thank you. Now here's a question that goes a little bit above my pay grade. I think you touched on this, but I want to make sure that this participant gets his answer. He'd like to know, is this Bordeaux red? Is it red? Is it right or left bank? Is it Cab or Merlot based?
Good, yes, right. So it's right bank. I skated over this, so I'm going to say this again. The reason in Bordeaux that they say right bank and left bank is that there are basically two major rivers that come out of the the continent or the country of France that lead into the Atlantic Ocean. It's the Dordogne and the Garonne. They come together, they create the Gironde estuary. That's the area that leads out into the ocean. It is considered on the southwest side of that estuary, you are on the left bank. The left bank is the very gravel soil where wines are dominant with Cabernet Sauvignon. They also put Merlot in there, but it's dominant Cabernet Sauvignon. Those are the wines that the British market and the American market know best, because in the 1700s and 1800s, the British shipping empire was incredibly powerful. And all products that were gathered from around the world had to go back to the port of London to get taxed before they were distributed. So the French wine would easily be brought to the UK, where there was a very good market for the wine. But after it went to London, it would go to America, as we were part of, well, previously part of British Empire. So that's why those types of wines are known very well. This one that we're having is on the other side of the estuary. It's on the northeastern side. So we're still very close to the Atlantic Ocean, but this is where Merlot grows better than the Cabernet Sauvignon. So this one is predominantly Merlot and then blended with some Cabernet Sauvignon. Right bank wines, like wines from Pomerol and from Saint-Emilion, are usually historically more found in cellars in inner Europe. So if you go to Belgium, that would be a very common place to find great right bank cellars. But the great left bank cellars of the world are usually located in Scotland, England, or America. So mostly Merlot.
Thank you. The questions are pouring in.
Oh, good.
So here's the next one. I have someone on the staff who's organizing them for me. Thank you so much. We have a question from our vegans in the audience asking about suggestions for vegan meals. Would these wines still work? It seems like you mentioned mostly meat-based meals with them. And do you have suggestions for vegan and vegan meals?
Yes, yes, they would. And I think with sometimes for really hardcore vegans, they might not drink certain wines because very often wines are either fined or filtered. When they're filtered, it's exactly what it sounds like. The wines are passed through a hose with usually a very fine mesh that filters out any impurities to the wine. When you do that, you're manipulating the wine. So many winemakers prefer not to filter their wine. They rather work with the barometric pressure that has to do with the rising or fading moon, which will make the wine become clear. And when it's clear, they then bottle the wine. If you're a mass production facility where you don't care or you don't have the time or you don't have the logistics to do something like that, you might fine your wine. And one of the ways you would fine your wine is that you could take egg whites, you can whip them up into a froth, and you pour the raw egg whites into the barrel of the wine. And basically all of the tannin or all of the impurities will attack or attach to the albumin or the protein in the wine. Besides egg whites, you can actually also use, it's sterilized, but it's dried beef or cow blood. So sometimes vegans won't have wines that they know that fining agent has been used. Diatomaceous earth is another natural thing that can be used to clear wines. But in all of these cases, none of them are using animal products. The Crow's Hermitage, they don't fine and they don't filter at all. And I think you can really taste it. It's so concentrated and there's so much texture to the wine. You can see they didn't eviscerate anything out of it. For dishes, I think maybe the most common thing for like the Bordeaux, sometimes Bordeaux has a vegetal character. So I love things like anything with bell pepper or eggplant are very friendly. Tomato is a killer for wine. For all of you that want to celebrate, you know, you're going to open a fancy bottle of wine and you're going to have it with either a bolognese sauce or red sauce over pasta. You're killing your wine. Don't do it. It's the worst thing you can possibly do. The best thing for red sauce is Chianti or Sangiovese, the grape varietal. because that's a very kind of terse, high acid wine, and it works well. For the Crow's Hermitage, you need something full flavored, I would say. Now, instead of, your bell peppers, maybe they have to be kind of cooked down almost into like a ratatouille character, or any of them would work very well with mushrooms, because mushrooms are really the great marrying non-meat protein product that works well with wines.
That's a lot to absorb. I hope everybody wrote that down. The tomato tip, that's a big one, Tim. Thank you. I'm going completely in the other direction now. The next question is, do you have a wine that you recommend to go with barbecue for our meat eaters in the crowd?
Yeah. So barbecue, like if we're doing things like barbecue ribs, which are usually dressed with, kind of like a sweet sauce, and that sauce almost always is like corn syrup or ketchup or something like that. Of course, not exclusively, but if you have Peter Luger's barbecue sauce, for example, it tastes a lot like, some type of a ketchup or something. So that sweetness is actually kind of very bad for the wine. So I would say, if you're more budget-minded, you would have something like a red Zinfandel from California. Really big, really rich, really jammy. That goes very well. But if we're doing barbecue with, say, a fine rib or just a salt-crusted strip or something, that opens you up to more things. So now you can have Cabernet or Bordeaux or that kind of thing. Usually when it comes to barbecue, and if you're looking for the best wine pairing, you don't want to be dressing up your meat with too much stuff. You don't want it in vinegar. You don't want sweet sauces on it. Really, salt and pepper and olive oil, that is what's going to marry best.
Awesome. I think we've covered the whole spectrum, so thank you for that. Next up, we have quite a few questions about wine glasses and wondering whether or not it really makes a difference. Is there really a difference between a white wine glass and a red wine glass? What do you think of stemless glasses? And someone asks that they point out that they know that Riedel makes grape and region-specific wine glasses. Are those worth the investment?
Okay, so it's a good question. And by the way, when I presented these wines, what's important, I think, in my presentation is that I have no financial interest in these wines or the winemaker. If I was representing one of these wines or the importer that bought them in, I would tell you lots of stories, but I am literally going into the open market and choosing these wines with no reservation. So they are genuinely wines that I love. Getting to the glassware, really what you need is a very simple glass. I don't really care for stemless glasses, although if I had a jelly jar or a stemless wine glass, of course I'm choosing the stemless wine glass. But fundamentally what we want is we want a glass that is clear, so it's not frosted, it's not cut. And we want it to kind of bellow out at the hips, and we want it to taper at the mouth. And the reason we want that is because when we swirl, we want all of the aromas in the glass to then kind of be focused in the mouth. When we go to take a taste, we're not only tasting the wine, we're actually pouring all of the aromas over our olfactories. I find personally that the thinner and more delicate the glass, the more enjoyable the wine is. So for me personally, Zalto glassware, which is made in Austria, is without equal. It is by far the most superior glass that I have experienced. And I own so many glasses. I own Baccarat, I own Spiegelau, I own Riedel, I own many different lines within all of those companies also. But the finest glass I find is the Zalto glass. Zalto also makes something called the universal glass, which is the one that I have here. And it goes very well for both white wine and red wine. Unfortunately, it's probably about $65 glass at retail. That sounds insane. It sounds excessive. But the truth is, you don't use it once. You use it many, many times. I've used my glasses hundreds of times. So if I divide that out over the cost of the glass, it's not that expensive. So it makes your wine taste better. It makes your wine taste more expensive, providing you serving it at the right temperature and in a clean glass. So,
thank you. Thank you so much, Tim. I'm just proud that I still have a wine glass from my wedding
oh yeah,
years ago, and we haven't broken it yet. Next up, we have two different categories of questions. One is about how to store wine, and the others are about food. But first up, would you store the reds in the refrigerator as well? I think a few people were surprised that you asked us to refrigerate the wines prior to tasting them. And if so, what's the ideal temperature for them? And how long will these particular wines last, since these were kind of big portions for our relatively smaller groups? And then we'll come back to the question about food.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not suggesting that we store these red wines in the refrigerator. I'm suggesting that we prepare the red wines by putting them in the refrigerator. I'm in Westchester right now. It's warm. It's like mid 80s. And I attempt not to use the air conditioning in my house. So when I pour the wine at cellar temperature, it's quickly coming up to a warmer temperature than ideally I want to be drinking the wine. So in turn, I'm going to make the wine a little bit cooler than what I would initially want the wine to express itself at. If you're storing wine, which is different, and the Wine Enthusiast is a perfect place to be able to get wine storage units, ideally you're trying to store your wine at 55 degrees Fahrenheit, but more importantly, you want a high humid environment. And refrigerators will take a lot of humidity out of the wine. So even your white wines, you know, it's okay to leave your white wine in the refrigerator for a month or two, but you wouldn't want to long-term store your white wine in the refrigerator. In an ideal world, 55 degrees temperature with 72% humidity and no light and no vibration. That's the ideal case scenario. If you can't do it, put it in your basement, because your basement certainly has got to be cooler than your main floor. And if you have a relatively warm environment, and when I say warm, I mean like 70 degrees, just drink your wines more quickly. You know, don't go and don't take a big position and buy hundreds of bottles that cost a lot of money if you're unwilling to spend $1,000 or $2,000 to store them properly, I would say. You asked another component to that question.
Stemless glasses.
Yeah,
I think you already answered that.
yeah, stemless. I mean, you know, they're fine. I don't particularly like them.
In a jelly jar.
Yeah, right. But and by the way, I will drink out of a jelly jar if need be. But,
That's good to know. We've got a lot of good takeaways, Tim. You know, like the no tomatoes things, and if you can't store your wine, just drink it. These are all good tips.
Can I just back up? If everyone who's listening, if you remember nothing other than all white Burgundy is made with Chardonnay, you will know more than 99% of the wine-loving world. All white Burgundy is made with Chardonnay. Please try to remember that one little tidbit. You don't have to remember all the other details, but that's a very, very important one.
That's good. That's going to be on the test. We're gonna have a short quiz at the end of this. Just a reminder, we're going to go with the Q&A until 7:15, and then we'll have a quick close. And then from 7:15 to about 7:45, we're going to have an open. We're going to switch this to move everybody from panelist view to gallery view, and have all the participants open for visiting if you'd like to stay. So the next couple of questions, Tim, are all about food. One person says that in the US, we often drink wine without food, or at least without much thought to what we're eating. How important is it to prepare the palate with some food? And what's a simple way to make wines taste better when you're drinking without a meal? And then sort of a follow-on to that is just say a few words about how we pair cheeses with wines and like how that happened tonight.
Yeah, okay, so when it comes to drinking wine without food, and I do it a lot, I mean, I do it almost all the time. Of the three wines that we had in front of us tonight, to me, the least flattering wine to have by itself is the Crozes Hermitage, the last red wine. That's because it's big and it's rich and it's leathery and it's black olive and there's tannin within that wine. So to me, not having anything else to eat or on my palate, it makes it the most exaggerated or the strongest handed wine. Whereas the Chablis by itself, to me, is wonderful. It's wonderfully mineral. It's wonderfully energetic. And to that, for me, in the summertime, I could easily drink 1 glass, 2 glasses, 3 glasses by the poolside without having anything. You know, we have a saying in the business that you buy on apples and you sell on cheese. So when you're preparing your palate to taste wine, if you eat cheese and you put all of that fat and richness on your palate, you can't taste all of the nuance and all of the delicacy within the wine. Whereas when you bite into a green apple, you have all of that malic acid that basically strips all the saliva off of your mouth. The next thing you put in your mouth, you can taste everything with pinpoint accuracy. So if you're tasting to make decisions, you're much better off having a clean palate, something with like eating a green apple, as opposed to when you go to a cocktail party or when you're going out to dinner, you have a nice, rich, fatty cheese. If there's anything wrong with the wine, it's going to hide it. If the wine is great, it's still going to taste great, but maybe not as great as if you didn't have that on it. So I think cheese is important to serve with wine. But just like the wines I served tonight, I didn't decide to start with the most tannic and full-bodied wine first. Just like we didn't choose the most funky, full-flavored cheese first. Just like with a meal and with wine and with cheese, you want to build to a crescendo. You want to start with the lightest and the most delicate, and you want to end with the most rich, the most full-bodied, the most extravagant, let's say. So I think that's the approach. When it came time preparing these particular cheeses, I consulted with the wine shop, and I just happened to know there are certain cheeses that they don't have to be exactly these cheeses, although these cheeses were excellent. There are some that fundamentally work with certain types of wines, and we just worked within those guidelines, and then the cheesemonger did her thing and chose, I assume, the best that she could find, and they were wonderful. I thought all of them complemented the wines very nicely. So start with light, end with more rich.
Great. Rules to live by. Thank you so much. I'm getting pinged left and right. Put your questions into the chat, would you please? And the next questions are all grouped together around France and French wines. And the first one is about climate change, and a question about whether or not climate change or how climate change has affected wine production in France. And then when we're able to travel again, and we all are looking forward to that, and we get to go to France, what regions would you recommend visiting for the best wine tours, especially for a red wine drinker, asks this person.
Okay, so is climate change affecting France? Absolutely. Is climate change affecting everywhere else? Yes, it's affecting everywhere. So regions that are relatively cool, like Champagne, like Chablis, like Burgundy, like Alsace, generally when you have those wines, you're going for a more delicate character. When you go into the very south, like in Bordeaux or in the southern Rhone where Châteauneuf-du-Pape are, the wines are always more alcoholic and more full because they get more sun. So one of the problems is that these areas, these cooler yielding climates that are supposed to yield you very delicate wines, are making more alcoholic, more rich and more powerful wines. So the wines are kind of getting away from their classic style. So winemakers are doing certain things to try to combat the heat. You can't all of a sudden say, okay, sun, don't shine, or don't be so hot. So maybe now they'll manage their canopy. Maybe they'll leave more leaves on the vineyards to help shade the grapes, to hopefully not sunburn the grapes. That might be something they do. So there are some techniques that they can do to try to fight the inevitable. But now on the southern coast of England, a lot of the champagne houses have invested very heavily on growing vines to make sparkling wine from the UK, which seems unusual, but they're quite successful. You asked another component to that question, which I also had a comment for.
Travel.
What's a good region to visit in France? The most picturesque and the most beautiful regions to visit in France are going to be Alsace. That's like the storybook stork flying through the beautiful village. That's what Alsace looks like. Alsace borders Germany, but they're not really known for making their red wines. The Loire Valley, which is really just a 45-minute train ride on the TGV going due south from Paris, is very beautiful. It's very popular with bike riders also because it's very flat. So there's a lot of castles, a lot of bike riders because they don't have to go up and down hills, and it is majestic and beautiful. They do make both white wines and red wines there. The red wines tend to be lighter bodied, and I love them. But I would say Loire Valley is going to be the most picturesque and beautiful.
Great. And as we close it out in the last 3 minutes, I am going to ask you 3 rapid fire questions, and they're totally unrelated. One is if you could recommend a couple of regions that you like in Australia for wines. Another is if you have a wine to recommend for Pride Month this month. And the last is, do you sell wine? How do we keep getting wisdom from Tim on how to buy wine? So let's take those 3 to close us out.
Okay, so the first one in Australia, probably the most famous region is Barossa. But Barossa is a very hot region. It's in southern Australia. And that's where they grow Grenache and Syrah. And the wines are really big and really powerful and really alcoholic and very jammy, like breakfast jam. And that's not really what I like in wine. So in the very south is the Mornington Peninsula. And that's where they grow Pinot Noir. And it's a very cool climate, and the wines are elegant and gorgeous. So I like Mornington Peninsula for red wine. And then there's something called the Clare Valley, which is basically a very large immigration of Germans. So you get very good Riesling and white varietals grown in the Clare Valley. So that's that. For Pride, it's a good question. I worked with a gay man, and he used to love when we sold. There's a Pomerol property called Fleur de Gay, the flower of gay, because there's also a Chateau de Gay. And he just found that so charming. And, the wine was good. It wasn't special, but he loved it. But I would say, there's a Beaujolais. There are about 10 major villages in Beaujolais, which is north of Lyon, that grow the grape varietal Gamay. And one of the villages is called Saint-Amour, or Saint of Love. So to me, that makes sense. Perhaps I would choose that. And then you had one last question.
The last question was, do you sell wine?
Oh, do I sell wine? I advise people on what they should get for their cellar. So I think that's maybe a better way. In order to sell wine, you need to have a license in New York State, and then there has to be a collection of taxes and things like that. So normally what I do is I am the information that helps to guide people in building collections. So if somebody came forward and said, I like what you presented, I'm interested in getting wine, I would come back to them and I would say, I think you should do this, that, and the other thing. And that's kind of the way I operate.
Great. Well, Tim, thank you so much. That was all amazing. We are all about swirling and creating vortexes now in our house. I've got my husband here creating his own vortexes over on my sofa. And I wanted to thank all of our guests for attending. Your support means so much to our students and to the whole WCC community. We hope you've had a great time tonight at this event. And if you're so moved, we hope that you'll consider making an additional donation to WCC, to our scholarship fund. One of my colleagues is going to drop a link into the chat box now that you can click through if you're so moved for that. And so thank you in advance for any generosity. If you have a little time right now, Tim has agreed to stay on for our Zoom after party. That's a big Brady Bunch style event that we're going to start in the next few minutes and carry on for about half an hour. And maybe Tim will be kind enough to answer a few more of the questions. We didn't get to all of them. For those of you who can't stay, I want to thank you again for taking the time to sample all these wonderful wines with us tonight. Many, many thanks to Tim. A special thanks to our WCC staff. You were so intrepid, delivering 90 tasting boxes all over Westchester. We're so grateful, and your skills at getting us all through the Zoom without any major disasters, as far as I can tell, has been a fun and a tremendous relief for Elise and I, so thank you for that. It's going to take a few minutes to switch over from panelist view to whatever the other view is that our staff person is going to switch everybody over. So if you want to stay, just hang on. She's going to switch you over. And if you can't stay, thanks again for joining us. Elise, join me, please. Raise a glass. Cheers. And we look forward to seeing you at our next pop-up event. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ruth. This was a wonderful evening. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Wow, it's a cameo from Dr. Miles.
Cheers, cheers. Thank you so much, Tim. That was so informative.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Good tips.
I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you so much, Tim. Incredible.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. By the way, has anyone retasted their Chablis? If you have to go to the refrigerator to get more, do it.